So here's what really happened at the No Kings rally today in Portland, Oregon, Saturday, October 18th, a day that will go down in history as the largest single day of protest in the history of the United States. Now, I actually participated in 2 marches. We had a little bit different structure for the event today. Normally, there's a big protest downtown, and then there are smaller ones in the periphery. Those can be more accessible for people who may not want to deal with massive crowds downtown or have to deal with trying to park down there or take public transit. We often have these smaller protests that are a little bit further out at other locations in the city and then the suburbs as well. However, today, the plan was to have these 3 locations where we gathered on the edges of the city. And then we all we all marched in together and met up with the people who were gathering, right downtown along the water. And I thought that was such a beautiful illustration of the way that we have to aggregate our power as a resistance movement, right? We're all coming together from our corners of America. We're coming in and we're pooling together our resources, our strength, and we're building our power. So we had these groups that met, we had rallies, we had speakers, and then we all marched together downtown and we met up along the waterfront with the 5051 folks who are already organizing down there. So I was a safety marshal at one of the East Portland locations, and our theme was labor. The other themes, I think, were like science, and we had one that was faith or clergy that gathered there. People basically showed up wherever was geographically closest for them. So for the East Portland event, I was basically a corker. That's where you block traffic so that the marchers are safe. You stand in the intersection and you reroute folks. I have not yet heard what the head count was for that event that started at the convention center and then we walked downtown. But I would say it was easily 4 to 5 times as many people as RSVP'd. It was massive. It was significantly larger than the last event we had at that location. With our location being labor themed, we had all kinds of union folks, SEIU, ONFP. By the way, they are striking. The nurses are striking at Kaiser, so we want to be sure and lend them our support. Teachers union folks. My husband was there with his union shirt on. A couple of things I noticed about that rally. The composition of people who attended was significantly different than previous indivisible rallies or marches or honkin' waves I've done before. We got all the regular people who tend to show up, and then we had a whole lot of labor people. So it meant that the crowd was a lot younger and a lot more diverse. There were a lot more families with kids. Folks were obviously dressed up in all their silly outfits, or they had their pro-labor shirts on. There were a lot more police than we have previously had at protests, but they weren't giving us a hard time. They had a lot of motorcycles that were helping block traffic for us, and they had police vehicles at the back of the actual march to keep protesters safe. And I'm not sure whether we knew that they were going to be doing that because we had police motorcycles corking in places where we thought volunteers were going to be corking. And to me, so I think police maybe were anticipating more counter protesters or agitators and thought that they would need to be a buffer. The whole time that I was working that event, I saw one counter protester. He drove by with his like giant Trump flags out the back of his car. That's it. He just drove by. That was him getting his feelings out. I know that people were really worried in advance of the events today because there were rumors swirling all online that Proud Boys were going to roll into Portland. They were going to create a lot of trouble for Oregonians, not just in Portland, but around the state. And none of those fears manifested. It was entirely nonviolent. There were no arrests at any of the peripheral events. The de-escalation team, we didn't really have to do much of anything at any of those satellite events. So we marched downtown. We went on the lower deck, the pedestrian deck of the steel bridge, and there was a little bit of a traffic jam because there were so many people. As we were marching downtown, there were folks who had set up along the route and had music that they were playing. They were cheering folks on. I noticed that for a number of elderly folks who couldn't necessarily walk that entire route and were not prepared to do the big march downtown, that they stopped along the way and then set up and were cheering folks on and waving their signs. So we get through the kind of bottleneck across the lower deck of the steel bridge and we pour out into downtown along the waterfront, and we join the really big event down there. And I could tell right away, as soon as we got there, this is way, way, way bigger than the first No Kings Day. I had my husband and my 14-year-old with me. I was pretty stoked that he decided last minute that he was going to go. I connected with the 5051 safety team folks downtown, and my husband and my 14-year-old were kind of like hanging out, doing support. Initially, I thought I would just be corking down there. So we were up toward the front of the parade next to the big fire truck. And the idea is that the bicycle corkers, they get ahead of the parade and they set up to make sure that they're blocking traffic along the route. And then the pedestrian corkers come in behind them and kind of relieve them and take up those spots so the bike corkers can move further down the route and block further down. So I thought I was going to be doing that, but then very quickly that changed because there was a group of Proud Boys that set themselves up in front of the fire truck ahead of the leading edge of the parade. Not officially started yet, and a group of, I would say 10 or 11 Proud Boys. One of them, I don't know, some millennial who is quite tall, with his phone out, was kind of the lead instigator. And they were screaming for their love of Trump, and they were trying to get people all upset. And again, parade has not started yet, but everybody's lined up and we're toward the front. And immediately I could see people on the edges were starting to engage with these, 10 guys. By the way, can we just say here, these threats of like the Proud Boys are going to come in and fuck shit up. And there were like 10 of them, 10. And they weren't very good at what they were doing. So they're yelling and trying to get people wound up. And they're just like, Trump is amazing. He's going to be president forever. So people were just screaming like, fuck Trump. And they were kind of taking the bait a little bit. And I was like, no. Right. One of our 6 Ds of de-escalation is distraction. So I was like, hey guys, let's look over here. Let's not give them any attention. Let's start a chant over here. But there was a group of folks who kind of took the bait and broke off and were yelling at the agitators and following them. And now they became the front of the parade. And that's not what we wanted, right? We wanted the fire truck and the big No Kings banner at the front. And I want to give a shout out here to the Humble Boys. So they're a group that they serve as a buffer between the Proud Boys, between counter protesters and the rest of the crowd. And so they had lined themselves up. They put their bodies right in there, and they have their signs that say Humble Boys. And they try to create that buffer. But there were still people that were following along and were engaging. And we don't want to feed those agitators, right? What they crave is attention. So we don't want to give them that. And there was this group of, I don't know, maybe close to 100 people that were following these guys, and it was several dozen at least. And they now looked like the leading edge of, and the agitators were bragging like, oh yeah, now we're the front of the parade, we're leading the way. And unfortunately, some of the women up there were taking the bait and were screaming like, fuck Trump, fuck you. And again, these guys, not the sharpest tack in the box. They're like, oh yeah, no man would want to date you. I wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole. Like that's the best that these incels have got. And they're filming, they've got their cameras in everybody's face. They're desperate for content that they can use for their propaganda. They're desperate to make money off of this by posting it all over their social media. And I was like, this is not what we need to be doing. So myself and a couple of other of the safety team folks, you could de-escalate in a number of different ways there. But of the 6 Ds, the one that seemed most appropriate in that moment was D, distance. So we kind of got in between the Proud Boys and all of these protesters that were following and engaging with them. I was like, hey, we're gonna stop right here. We have gotten ahead of the fire truck. We have left the parade. We're all gonna stop. Everybody's gonna stop. And we're gonna wait for the fire truck to catch up with us. And those agitators, they're just going to keep marching. And I think the Humble Boys just kept kind of pushing them forward. And the rest of the crowd, we're stopping here. We're waiting for our folks to catch up with us. We want to connect with the march itself. We want to be with our people. We don't want to waste our energy on these guys. Everybody stopped and waited. And then the fire truck caught up with us. And everybody was then connected with the march. And so myself and a number of the other safety team people, we didn't have to engage with the agitators at all. We didn't have to give them any attention at all. The de-escalation had nothing to do with talking to or engaging with agitators and everything to do with engaging with our folks, helping redirect them, helping reconnect them with the march. The rest of the march, entirely peaceful. I didn't hear any reports from Portland police of any arrests. Okay, come back for part 2 because I want to talk about how large the crowd was and some of the other details. Okay, let me post this and then come back for part 2. Okay, part 2 of what really happened at the No Kings rally today in Portland, Oregon. I'm sorry, I'm filming from bed. I came home from walking about 7.5 miles today, and I completely crashed. I just murdered a giant bowl of hot and sour soup, and then I was out cold. It wasn't until one of my college kids called me and was like, "Hey mom, how'd it go today?" that I jolted awake. And I was like, "Oh crap, I promised everybody I would make a video and talk about how it went." So forgive me if I'm not on my A game and I'm a little bit rambly. I'm way exhausted in the best possible way, right? I had to do a lot of extroverting, a lot of communicating with people, and then just like a lot of walking and a lot of hyper focus, right? When you're on the safety team, you've constantly got your head on a swivel. And to say that the tensions were running high would not be accurate, because I think that the mood at the event was just overwhelmingly positive, right? The whole event was just steeped in good vibes. But there were some folks there who were trying to cause problems. And when you're at an event where there are tens of thousands of people gathered, and you're trying to prioritize the safety of people within your little quadrant, within your little zone, you got to be focused, and it's really exhausting. So now I'm just like a little bit fried. So I left off in the last segment talking about how, as the march was getting underway, there were some Proud Boy agitators at the front who were causing problems. There were literally like 11 of them. There was not some big scary wave of right-wingers who were there fucking shit up. No, it was just a couple of guys desperately trying to get their footage for their social media account. All right, they were trying to start something, and we were not going to give them the attention that they so craved. So after they moved on, the actual march got underway, and it was completely fine. The event was completely nonviolent, despite the fact that Mike Johnson and the Republicans have been trying to smear millions and millions of regular, average Americans, falsely trying to depict us as violent Antifa Marxist terrorists, claiming that it was a "We Hate America" rally, when you could see everybody there was just regular folks. There were families with little kids. There were elderly folks. There were lots of people in loads of silly costumes. Portland really leaned into the whimsy. These are regular people exercising our constitutional right to free speech. So Mike Johnson is trying to say that we're violent Antifa terrorists. There was no property damage. There were no arrests. There was nothing violent, nothing extreme going on. Regular Americans doing what Americans do, a proud tradition of exercising our right to free speech. So the whole thing went off very, very well, with the fire truck at the front leading the way, followed by a car that had our parade marshal. I don't know what role she really served. There was a drag queen, Christy Gnome, Gnome, and then a big No Kings banner, and then all of the marchers. We went up and around and over both bridges, made a big loop, and came back downtown where we started out on NATO Parkway. So because I was at the leading edge of the march, I was one of the first people to get back with the fire truck to the beginning, and I had the privilege of standing and directing traffic and watching everybody streaming over the bridges. I know that the Oregonians' initial estimate that they published at like 1 p.m. Like we'd barely gotten going, and there were people who were still trying to get downtown, and there was such a traffic jam. It was so congested downtown that I heard that they were stopping people and not letting them come down onto the waterfront until more people had moved off and gone onto the bridge. So I don't know when the Oregonian did that count, but the organizers of the event said, no, it's way more than 40,000. I have not seen an official count yet. I've seen speculative counts between 60 and 80,000 people. There's no way it was only 40,000. And I'm frustrated that the press is so determined to put out numbers prematurely without doing an accurate count, often before the event is even underway. We saw that with No Kings 1 in multiple locations, that the press would show up right at the beginning, and, like 25 or 50% of the folks wouldn't even have turned up yet. And they would do like some kind of speculative estimate, and then that would be the number that they would publish. We have had consistent problems with the press massively underreporting turnouts. That's why we're going to wait and see what Indivisible and No Kings organizers and 5051 say about the actual turnout, because they have a lot of metrics for how they calculate crowd size. So I'm watching people come off one bridge as other people are still waiting for their turn to get on the first bridge, right? So huge numbers of people. And I would love to hear, if you were at the march today, what you felt the vibe was, because some of the previous protests and rallies I've been to, the vibe has been a little bit more angry. And today I felt was more celebratory. I think people were really encouraged to see that they were not alone, and to see how massive the public opposition actually is against Trump, to see how The public response to the cruel and terrible things that the regime is doing lately was so robust. It's that physical manifestation, it's that evidence right in front of you that all of these other people are also as outraged as you are and also care as much as you do about protecting our immigrants, about protecting the rule of law, about how we shouldn't have troops in our cities, about how Donald Trump is destroying this democracy and that we cannot allow that to happen. There definitely was that joy and that hope in the air. It was gorgeous weather. Initially, we were worried it would be rainy because, like Portland in October, but it was sunny, like 60 degrees. Just stunningly beautiful today, right? Like as Oregonians, we're proud of how beautiful our state is. And then to be surrounded by so many good, compassionate, caring people. You couldn't do the march today and not have your heart just swell with love for our state, for the people of this state. I don't see how you could do the march today and not feel that solidarity and not just fall in love with Portland all over again. I have a friend who lives in Nova Scotia and she messages me, probably once a month and is like, "Girl, come move to Nova Scotia. Just get out of there. I worry about you, I worry about your family." And I'm telling you, walk in today. There's no fucking way. You can pry Oregon from my cold dead hands. There's no way. There's no way. These are the people that I want to be with. These are the people that I want to be marching with. I'm so sorry that we have to go through this period in time, but we are going through it together, right? None of us deserve to be doing this, but we get to do it together. And I love my state. I just think there's nowhere like Portland. And I think that for so many Americans who marched today, I'm sure that you felt the same, that your affection for your city, for the people of your city is growing day by day as you're watching how we are all resisting, right? I'm not somebody who leans really heavily into patriotism. I understand the utility of using patriotic imagery when it comes to events like No King's Day. And I understand there are so many dark and unjust things about American history, but there is that element of like, I'm really proud to be an American. I am proud of my fellow Americans who are standing up for freedom, for justice, for human rights. We're this hugely diverse nation with so many different subcultures, and yet people from every corner, every community, no matter how tiny, in this country had a No King's Day event. There were, I think, more than 2,700 events. And it's easy to look at the big events like New York and Chicago and like San Francisco and LA. San Diego, I think, had a huge turnout as well. It's easy to look at cities with really big turnouts and be like, wow, that's unbelievable. But for me, it's those small protests in rural, deep red communities where people had to take on greater risk, right, to show up. It was much harder for somebody in a small rural red community to turn out today for No King's Day than it was for me in Portland, Oregon. And yet we saw people do that everywhere. I'm so proud of us. I'm so encouraged. And I think that you should be too. I know that times feel really dark right now. Today was necessary for our morale. It was necessary for us to build connections. I hope if you came to No King's Day today, that is just the first step, right? That you are determined now. You got a little taste of the kind of work that you could be involved in, how good and necessary that work is. And I hope that you want to plug into the next thing. I hope that you're ready for the next event. If you're here in Portland, I really encourage you to get connected with 5051. They are determined to do really good local organizing and also to have more events, different kinds of events than just rallies and marches, but also more rallies and marches. Really good folks leading 5051 here in Portland. For me, as I was directing foot traffic, watching people streaming off the bridge for, over an hour. I'm sure it was more than that. Knowing that today we showed up as our authentic selves, as Americans who love democracy, who care about justice and human rights. I would love to hear about how your No King's Day experience was. For me, I came away obviously like completely exhausted in the best possible way, but also really encouraged. And I met tons of new people. I'm now chatting with all kinds of folks, trying to work on next steps. And I really want to encourage you, if you stepped out for No King's Day today, let this be the first step. We've got this momentum going now, and it's crucial that we continue to organize and push and level up. I am so proud of us, and I look forward to seeing what kind of good work we're going to do together next. I hope you had a good No King's Day too.